In 1637, a single enterprise achieved a valuation that, adjusted for inflation, dwarfed the modern market capitalizations of Apple, Microsoft, and Google combined. The sum was equivalent to roughly $7.9 trillion. How did a private entity, operating out of a small European republic, amass a concentration of wealth so staggering that it fundamentally rewired the global economy? The answer lies not in mere trade, but in the invention of an entirely new mechanism of global control. The 17th century witnessed the birth of corporate power in a form previously unimaginable. The Dutch East India Company, widely known by its Dutch acronym VOC, was not merely a mercantile firm. It was a sovereign empire disguised as a balance sheet, deploying a ruthless calculus of profit and force across the oceans. It established the blueprint for modern capitalism, merging financial innovation with absolute military supremacy. Before the VOC, the lucrative spice trade was a fractured, high-risk gamble. Individual merchants funded single, perilous voyages to Asia, pooling resources to buy ships and hire crews. This archaic system was fraught with extreme financial peril, where a single shipwreck, a bout of scurvy, or a Portuguese naval blockade could instantly bankrupt a syndicate and wipe out vast sums of private wealth. To mitigate this catastrophic risk and eliminate destructive domestic competition, the Dutch government intervened in 1602. They forced these warring merchant syndicates to consolidate into a single, unified monopoly. This legislative act birthed the first true multinational corporation, designed not just to compete in the market, but to dominate it entirely. The VOC pioneered a revolutionary financial architecture known as the joint stock model. Instead of funding isolated, temporary voyages where capital was liquidated upon return, investors purchased permanent shares in the ongoing, continuous operations of the entire company. The capital became locked in, providing the company with a permanent war chest that could be deployed for long-term strategic planning. This structural innovation completely decoupled capital from direct management. Citizens of the Dutch Republic, ranging from wealthy aristocrats to ordinary artisans, could purchase fractional ownership. It democratized investment risk while simultaneously centralizing unprecedented capital concentration in the hands of a ruling board of directors known as the Gentlemen 17. To facilitate this massive influx of capital, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was established. It functioned as the world's first official secondary market, allowing these corporate shares to be freely bought and sold. This created a highly liquid market, birthing modern financial speculation, forward contracts, and the very concept of shareholder value that drives today's global markets. But capital alone did not forge global dominance. The true engine of the company's supremacy was its foundational charter. The Dutch government granted the enterprise early, state-like manifestations that permanently blurred the boundaries between private enterprise and national sovereignty. The corporation was legally transformed into an extension of the state apparatus. The VOC was legally empowered to draft its own armies, wage war, negotiate international treaties, strike its own coinage, and execute prisoners. It operated as a private corporation wielding the absolute, terrifying authority of a sovereign state far beyond the reach of European oversight. This unprecedented delegation of power created a geopolitical anomaly, a profit-driven entity with a license to kill. Armed with infinite capital and complete military autonomy, the company aggressively expanded into the Asian theater. The pursuit of exotic spices was no longer a matter of simple commerce. It evolved into a brutal theater of corporate warfare and territorial conquest. The company built heavily fortified trading posts, systematically pushing out European rivals and subjugating local rulers. Nutmeg, mace, and cloves were the most lucrative commodities on Earth, commanding astronomical markups in European markets. A single sack of nutmeg could purchase a house in Amsterdam. The VOC recognized that true wealth lay not in market participation, but in absolute, unyielding monopolization of the source. They achieved this monopoly through chilling efficiency. In the Banda Islands, the sole global source of nutmeg at the time, the VOC utilized its private military to enforce exclusive trade contracts. When local leaders defied these commercial dictates, the company systematically eliminated the native populations, replacing them with enslaved labor to secure total control of the supply chain. This ruthless enforcement allowed the company to artificially constrain global supply. By deliberately destroying excess crop yields and burning warehouses full of spices, the VOC manipulated global prices. This calculated destruction ensured that supply never outpaced demand, guaranteeing maximum profitability for its shareholders back in Europe. The mechanics of this artificial scarcity laid the essential groundwork for modern cartel behavior. The corporation demonstrated with brutal clarity that controlling the choke points of a supply chain was infinitely more profitable than merely trading within an open market. The unseen forces of supply and demand were no longer natural phenomena. They were weaponized tools of corporate strategy. For nearly 2 centuries, this aggressive model proved invincible. The company deployed thousands of heavily armed merchant ships and employed tens of thousands of workers. It operated a vast, intricate inter-Asian trade network, trading Indian textiles for Japanese silver, which effectively subsidized its highly lucrative European spice exports. The dividends paid to early investors were staggering, frequently reaching 18% annually and occasionally spiking much higher. The VOC's relentless financial success fueled the Dutch Golden Age, transforming Amsterdam into the undisputed financial capital of the world and the epicenter of early global trade. The wealth generated built the iconic canals and funded the masterpieces of the Dutch Renaissance. Yet the very architectural framework that enabled its meteoric rise contained the hidden seeds of its ultimate destruction. The immense, unprecedented scale of the VOC's operations bred profound informational asymmetries between the directors in Europe and the administrators operating in Asia. A letter could take 8 months to travel between Amsterdam and Batavia. Without the benefit of rapid communication, regional governors operated as autonomous warlords. This created a massive principal-agent problem on a global scale. Separated by oceans, these local administrators prioritized personal enrichment, illicit smuggling, and local power consolidation over the company's long-term financial health. Corruption became deeply endemic, hollowing out the organization from within. Furthermore, the staggering cost of maintaining a sprawling private military empire steadily eroded the massive profit margins generated by the spice monopoly. The massive overhead of imperialism, including forts, garrisons, and warships, began to vastly outweigh the revenues of commerce. To maintain the vital illusion of perpetual growth and appease demanding shareholders, the VOC resorted to a dangerous financial maneuver. The company began paying high dividends using borrowed capital rather than actual operating profits. This classic moral hazard masked the deep underlying rot within the corporate balance sheet, creating a financial bubble sustained only by debt and historical prestige. By the late 18th century, shifting geopolitical realities further destabilized the weakened company. The Fourth Anglo-Dutch War decimated the VOC's naval fleet, abruptly exposing the extreme fragility of a business model entirely dependent on absolute maritime supremacy and uninterrupted trade routes. The British Empire rapidly eclipsed Dutch naval power, severing the vital arteries of the spice trade. The once invincible corporate sovereign was effectively bankrupt, crushed beneath a mountain of unserviceable debt. In 1799, the Dutch government was forced to formally dissolve the VOC, nationalizing its massive liabilities and absorbing its remaining territorial possessions into the state empire. The grand experiment in corporate sovereignty ended in spectacular insolvency. The collapse of the VOC was not merely a colossal business failure. It was the first great systemic shock of globalized capitalism. It starkly revealed the inherent catastrophic dangers of merging relentless profit motives with sovereign military power and unchecked territorial ambition. It proved that a corporation, no matter how vast or powerful, cannot indefinitely sustain the burdens of an empire. The legacy of the Dutch East India Company extends far beyond the historical spice trade. It engineered the fundamental DNA of the modern multinational corporation, proving the immense world-altering power of pooled capital, limited liability, and secondary financial markets. The financial instruments forged in Amsterdam still dictate the rhythm of global commerce today, but its rise and fall also serve as a permanent historical warning. The VOC demonstrated that when a corporate entity achieves state-like authority, the singular pursuit of shareholder value can easily mutate into unchecked exploitation, systemic corruption, and eventual collapse. The drive for infinite growth eventually consumes the very infrastructure that supports it. The financial architecture they pioneered remains the absolute bedrock of global markets today. The joint stock model, the secondary exchange, the strategic manipulation of supply chains, and the relentless pursuit of monopoly are all direct echoes of 17th century Amsterdam. The mechanisms of power they invented have simply evolved, masked by modern regulation but driven by the exact same incentives. The matrix of power established by the VOC fundamentally altered the trajectory of human history. It proved that the invisible forces of capital, when armed with sovereign authority, possess the power to violently reshape the world. The company left behind a complex legacy of financial innovation and human devastation that still underpins the hidden architecture of the global economy.